It's not calling you Josh Frydenberg, it's calling you Dosh Frydenberg.
Under the coalition, taxes for hard-working Australians will always be lower.
You know, I don't hold a hose, mate, and I don't sit in control room.
They're answers that only can come from Victoria, I'm afraid, because that's not my job.
But I ain't spending any time, though, because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person is torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
Well, g'day listeners, and welcome once again to the Two Jacks. Here we are, episode, I think it's 82. I may be wrong. Yeah, 82 it is, where we take a look at what's going on around the world, and there's plenty going on, and then take a look at what's going on around Australia in politics and media. And joining me as usual is Jack in Hong Kong. Jack. G'day, mate. How are you?
Good.
Yeah. Lots going on around the world at the moment, so we may as well kick it off. And the big news, of course, is that yesterday Joe Biden announced that he was dropping out of the presidential race. Did it by Twitter or X. And I don't know that he's been seen in public. Certainly hasn't made a speech since. And it would seem that his anointed successor, the one he has endorsed, Kamala Harris, will go through, Jack. Seems that way, doesn't it?
Well, that seems the most probable result. I don't think it's sort of set in stone yet.
No, not yet.
Because there is a convention to go to, and there is a convention process. Jenny Psaki says that they're redesigning the process so that it will make her look strong at the end. But I don't know how that's going to work. But she's got the support of all the heavy hitters. And in fact, probably the heaviest hitter of all, Nancy Pelosi, came out yesterday.
Well, Pelosi hasn't endorsed her yet, has she?
Yes, she has. Personally and politically endorsed her.
And Barack Obama hasn't endorsed her yet because Barack Obama believes in a contested convention.
Yeah, he would like to see that happen. But Pelosi's really a key figure in this. She was the one who pushed Joe Biden out the door.
It would seem so, although obviously Joe Biden had received a number of approaches from senior Democrats around the country, including Barack Obama. But that would seem Pelosi's intervention would seem to be the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah, as recently as early as last Wednesday, Mark Halperin, the very well connected with the Democrats reporter, was saying that Biden would go, and he would go on Sunday. So there was that part of the Democrat leadership in Washington had a timeline as far ago as last Wednesday. Whether Joe knew about the timeline, they knew about the timeline. Yeah.
So moves were afoot. It had to happen, didn't it? It really did have to happen. Tell me, how do you think the remainder of Joe Biden's presidency, we talked about this in speculation in weeks previous, that it would be highly controversial if he remained as president. And I think that stuff is just getting bedded down now, isn't it?
Personally, I think there's an answer to that. He can say that he's fit to be president at the moment, but if he stood for re-election, he would be standing for a 4-year term, and he doubts that he would be fit to serve a full term, and therefore the people should vote for who the president's going to be. A lot of people aren't going to believe that quite, but they'll probably go along with it.
Yeah, I think that's right. Would it be of any benefit? Let's assume that Kamala does become the anointed one, the nominee, the Democrat nominee. Could she take over the White House in the interim?
No, that would be bad for her and would ruin her chances of re-election.
So this is the problem I've got with Kamala Harris. She carries the baggage of the Biden administration, for good or ill. There are some good things, but there are plenty to criticise. And she also carries the baggage of someone like a Gavin Newsom as being a sort of California liberal. and that's part of the problem. So I would have thought the best way to do it was to have someone who had no connection with no precise connection with the Biden administration. Someone like Newsom or Whitmer.
Yeah, I think an outsider would be better. Firstly, I don't think Joe Biden's the Democrats' biggest problem. I think the biggest problem the Democrats have is that they have vacated the centre of politics to a very large extent and left that free for Trump to sit in. So whoever takes over, if there's I think there is a feasible path to victory for the Democrats, but it requires, it would be easier to do from someone who wasn't part of the administration, so a state governor or someone like that. But then they need to distance themselves from a fair few of the policies of the Biden administration. I mean, migration's the running sore. Whoever's the nominee needs to stand up and say, we got this wrong, and we're going to use every legislative and executive power in our hands to secure the southern border. If they don't do that, they won't win.
Yeah, that's why I think Newsom has some credit because he is a governor on the border that has a border, Rio Grande. And he can discuss his own challenges. He can raise his own challenges that the state of California has had to deal with. Let's go back. How do we? I mean, people are saying, writing the eulogies, the political eulogies for Biden. Where do you place him in the pantheon of US presidents in the last little while?
Better than Carter.
Yeah, Jimmy didn't have a lot of luck. You need a lot of luck too to be successful in politics, and he didn't have a lot of luck.
Yeah. I'm being kind to him. Better than Carter, but not that much better, and not very good is the answer. Just one question before we move on. Do you think he should pardon Hunter Biden?
This is some of the sort of nonsense that's been put about. Trump uses pardons as a political cachet. I don't think that's something that Biden would contemplate or should contemplate anyway.
Well, I think he should. Personally, I think he should pardon his son.
Why? What would be the political benefit of that?
There would be no political benefit of that, but I think it'd be the right thing to do. I mean, I think there'd be no political cost in doing so. No one really thinks Hunter Biden would have been investigated or charged if his name wasn't Hunter Biden. If his name was Hunter Smith, this wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, no, I understand that. Look, and Hunter Biden is I almost called him Hunter S. Thompson. Hunter Biden is still awaiting sentence.
And further charges coming up, but he can prospectively pardon him if he wants to, and I think he should.
Well, these are state laws too, Jack. The Delaware business, those are peculiar state laws. I'm not sure that Joe Biden has any reach there. That's the first thing. The Delaware is a specific, you have to complete a form that says you're not a drug user when you get your license. So those are state laws.
But he was charged by the feds, not by the Delaware people.
Yeah, well, he was tried in Delaware. So I don't know that that's of any use. I mean, look, it is amusing to think that the Supreme Court has now given Joe Biden, who is the lamest of lame duck presidents, complete autonomy to do what he like. He could knock out Trump, couldn't he?
No, that's a misreading, I think, of the Supreme Court decision. I've actually read it now. What it does is gives them immunity when they're acting within the powers of the presidency. It doesn't give them carte blanche to do whatever they like. It gives them immunity from prosecution, civil or criminal, when they're acting within the bounds of the presidential powers. And the president's not authorised to go and shoot a political opponent.
Well, who said that? I mean, there's plenty of events that we can talk about where political assassinations have been contrived by the United States government, mate.
That's acting extraterritorially. That's a different question. at law.
Well, someone's called it. Someone's called it. You know, the president himself has called it. But look, it is one of those amusing little sidelines that the Supreme Court has essentially given Joe Biden carte blanche. And it is carte blanche, mate. That's the way it's got to be interpreted. And certainly that's the way Donald Trump's interpreting.
Well, I'd suggest sit yourself down and have a read of the decision.
All right. I notice you've got Iowa Hawk there, gee whiz, mate. You know, if people are wondering why you're turning into a right-wing ratbag, that's a pretty good place to start. Iowa Hawk. I genuinely feel empathy for Biden. I'm going to have a crack at this because I watched my own beloved grandma deteriorate from dementia and Alzheimer's for over a decade, and I wouldn't wish that fate on anyone. Is he a neurologist when he's not blogging? You know, bit of a hobby there, neurology. He's actually from Iowa. Has diagnosed Joe Biden with dementia or Alzheimer's. We're not quite clear, but that's absolute rubbish. And this is, you know, you might remember a lot of people were doing some street corner psychology when it came to Donald Trump, referring to him as a psychopath or a sociopath. And Iowa Hawk and many others have done exactly the same with Joe Biden. From a distance, I can tell he's got dementia.
Yeah, well, I think it's a bit like saying that you think Trump's got narcissistic personality disorder, and I think he probably does.
He probably does, but I mean, neither you nor Iowa Hawk are qualified to make those sorts of decisions.
What we are qualified to do is comment. He's not a right winger, by the way, David Birch.
Oh, I know. I was just having a go, but it bothers me, that stuff. I mean, you know, octogenarians, their memory slips, their stream of consciousness slips from time to time. But that doesn't mean you got dementia. That's a completely different thing. And there are tests for these things that one might argue Joe should undergo. He's declined to do them, but we might remember that Donald Trump was tested. There is a particular memory test. I'm just trying to think of the name of it, but it doesn't matter. It one or a variety of them will have, you know, it's basically they'll read a passage will be read to them over a minute long, so about 180 words, and they will be asked to identify 5 nouns in that passage. So there are potentially about 60 nouns in that passage, and if you can remember 5, you're okay to be the US president. Donald Trump, of course, aced his test.
He did very, very well. Better than anyone.
Better than anyone. He got him in order. He actually got him in order. He said, oh, wow. And it was another congressman who gave him the test, apparently. So I don't know how truncated or abbreviated the test was, but he remembered he, she, me, camera, television, something like that. And he remembered them in order, so he did better than anybody else. He said it was actually a very tough test, but although it wasn't tough for him.
Lots of people say he did better than anybody, you know.
he's aced it. He got 100 out of 100.
120 out of 100. Yeah.
I think there will be this call for Biden's mental acuity to at least be tested. There are no congressional powers. Well, was it 25th Amendment, Jack?
The 25th Amendment allows a majority of the cabinet
the executive
to displace the president, replace him with he or she with the vice president, if they form the view that they're unable to exercise the powers of the presidency. And that was really kind of designed for people who have strokes and stuff. What was that movie, Dave, where the president has the stroke, and instead of using the 25th Amendment, the political power brokers find a bloke who looks just like him, who's a street front lawyer, and they shove him in the job. You know?
Yeah.
Lovely movie, I think.
Yes. I think there's going to be a bit of controversy about this. I did see some very, very early polling, and it related to Joe's approval rating. And his approval rating is in the negative, but it has been for a long time. But it was a negative 10, which is a sort of significant improvement. And I just wonder that the American people might feel a little bit more kindly towards him.
I don't think they will want him pushed out of office before January.
I reckon there's a bit of that going on too. Yeah, that it would be a very, very bad look if the Dems sort of used him as a doormat.
Yeah, if they push him out of office, I think that would be out of the presidency. I think that would be politically unpopular. I think people think he's probably not quite up to it, but they'll muddle through until January.
And I think there's an overall sense of a decent human being there, a person whose time was definitely up, but I think any sort of slagging of his job as a president coming from the Democrats, either trying to remove him from the White House or treating him as a non-entity, would be a really, really bad move.
I've rather enjoyed the statements of praise that he's been getting. I particularly like the one from Nancy Pelosi when she lauded Joe's long career and what a great person he was and all that sort of stuff. I suspect she'd only just finished wiping the blood off the knife as she was typing it. But
that's the way it goes in politics. Yeah. Greg Sheridan hammered out something, I think, fairly quickly because there were one or two typos in it, Jack. But
don't you have sub-editors in your newspaper anymore?
Well, there was a number of my's that ended up as mounts, but he said, here we wrote, for all that, in time, Biden will deserve to be honoured and be the just recipient of many tributes. Agree with that. I'm constantly surprised when I'm in Washington by how many people have good things to say about Biden personally. And I thought that was an interesting point to make. Biden was chosen as a VP by Obama because of his contacts across the political divide. Biden's always sort of nourished and encouraged those relationships with his political foes. Barack Obama wasn't so keen. And it was said that Joe Biden had the best teletext in Washington. So he's been a person who's been prepared to reach across.
That and his he had some ability a better ability to relate to ordinary Americans than Obama did, got him the job. David Burge, the bloke you were slagging off a moment ago, had another point to make as well, and this is also true. It's complicated. Burge said, at the same time, the idea of him as a truth-telling, unifying healer is ludicrous. His whole 50-year career in D.C. was based upon being a self-aggrandizing, blowhard attack dog, and he was an attack dog. He was the bloke the Democrats could send out there to have a go at anybody, and he did it. Someone has to do that in politics, and that's part of who he was. So it's a complicated situation and a complicated legacy to leave behind, as most of us have,
Yeah, exactly right. Nothing's either black or white. There's nuance. Greg Sheridan goes on to say, as you've said, that Biden was a poor president because he moved his agenda away from the centre and to the left.
Can I just clarify that? What the Democrats need to do is to say, would Bill Clinton be doing this? They need to get back to a Clinton-type Democrat Party if they're going to win.
What about Obama? 2 terms did fairly well.
Clinton was better on policy. Obama was a symbol. Yeah.
Clinton was the last president to deliver a budget surplus.
Yes.
I just saw a figure too for the interest payment that the American government will be obliged to make next year, Jack.
You couldn't put it on your Visa card?
get knocked back there. It's basically almost 70% of all income tax revenues.
Yes.
That's debt surplus. That's just to keep the wolves from the door. So that's a staggering amount. And we'd have to say that, Donald Trump dropped $4 trillion essentially for nothing in tax cuts for large corporations and high wealth individuals. So that's $4 trillion out the door. And now they're going to have to deal with a lot of this stuff. I pity any administration coming in that has to deal with some of the debt limitation stuff they've got to deal with. But they probably won't. They've been kicking it down the road pretty much from Clinton's presidency onwards.
Yeah. The only way to fix it in the end is growth.
Yeah. And I did take a bit of a look at their growth figures. The American economy has grown by just under 2% in the last 2 years, or since 2022. It did have a rapid rise. The COVID leap, like most countries did, I think about 6% growth in 2021. But since 2022, fairly tepid growth at just under 2%. That's kind of where Australia is and kind of where most of the Western world is at the moment. So you think you'll hang on until January. And so what happens next, Jack?
What happens next is we go to
Chicago.
Chicago for the convention, yes.
Yeah. Now, will it be a contested convention where basically what I think should happen, and we'll talk about this, but I don't think it's likely to happen now, is that a number of genuine candidates would have the capacity to sell themselves as potential nominees and leave it to the floor, leave it to the floor to decide on which one would be best. That's my view.
I think there will be a sizable part of the Democrat Party who thinks that what should happen. But over the last few days, it looks like the leadership is coalescing around the idea that would be a bad idea, that would be a bad plan. Who's going to win that battle, I don't really know. It is notable, like you already pointed this out, that Obama is the kind of the sole standout, if you like, of the leaders who is saying our processes within our party will turn up the right nominee. He's not endorsing Kamala Harris as yet. But the others seem to have decided, well, look, that's all going to be too messy. What we need to do is to work out who the candidate's going to be and run a convention that produces her at the end.
Highly managed convention, yeah.
Yeah, a highly managed convention. There's some real risks in doing that. In that you disenfranchise a lot of your supporters, and these are the people. It's the delegates and their friends who are the people who are going to be the ground game for the campaign, who are going to go out there knocking on doors. And if you make them feel unwanted, you might have very little ground game. Yeah.
Well, furthermore, I think the general American public, or the broader American public, are going to see this as sort of something that was like a bit of a fix being put in place, rather than perhaps a sort of contest of ideas and personalities.
Well, it will be a fix. It's not just that they're going to see it as a fix; they're going to see it correctly as a fix.
Well, they're going to see it. The way it stands at the moment, if Kamala goes to the convention and is unopposed, I think they will see that as a fix. I think they need to look at alternatives. Surely, someone like Newsom and Whitmer have both endorsed Kamala now. Joe Biden, of course, that's the key endorsement that she's had, and I just read her statement. I am honoured to have the President's endorsement, and my intention is to earn and win this nomination. Over the past year, I have travelled across the country, talking with Americans about the clear choice in this momentous election, and that is what I will continue to do in the days and weeks ahead. I will do everything in my power to unite the Democratic Party and unite our nation to defeat Donald Trump and his extreme Project 2025 agenda. We must deal with the Project 2025 stuff, Jack, but perhaps not today.
Can I just add, there's one thing that the Democratic candidate is going to have to do, and that is they're going to need a candidate who actually loves America and likes Americans, or at least is prepared not to sneer at Americans or denigrate America for 4 or 5 months.
So both Kamala and Newsom, Whitmer, those likely candidates are in their 50s. They will have a youthful, somewhat more youthful approach. Now, Donald Trump will be the oldest nominee to run for the presidency. I think they've got some benefits there. They were certainly trying in some of their attack ads that were rolled out yesterday. I see some real benefits from saying someone like Newsom, what's wrong with having someone who's bright, smart, quick on his feet, and I don't know that they'll see that with Kamala.
No. The other problem with Kamala is she churns through staff at Kevin Rudd levels. She has a big problem with that now, and she's just not. To be honest, she's just not very likable. But you never know when you give people these jobs who's going to be good
Where
at
they
them.
grow, yeah. That's still a long shot hope, isn't it? You know,
it is. But compare where they were. I saw Nate Silver's thing today, and he says on his model, Joe Biden had a 25% chance of winning. He said, but more realistically, it was 10 to 15% chance of winning.
Right.
I think Harris is a bit better chance than that, but she's a long way back.
She said last week, 6 6 lengths back, mate.
Yeah,
6 lengths back at the turn.
Yeah, but she's going to have to be Chautauqua to win from there. But
that is doable. That would be an even graver challenge for someone like Newsom. They would have to basically, everyone knows who Donald Trump is, but in the States, maybe not everyone knows who Gavin Newsom is. So
yeah, one of my good friends here was suggesting that perhaps the other potential nominees are looking at those odds that I described and deciding, well, no one's going to win this, so I'm better off holding back for 4 years and giving myself a real chance. The weakness of that as a tactic is, from their own personal point of view, is that go back to 2004. Barack Obama was an Illinois state senator who made a brilliant speech at the Democrat convention, but no one realistically thought he was going to be president in 2008. So you wait 4 years and someone else might turn up, or some other possible. Right. Yeah.
Well, also, too, if you want to run the speculation even further, if Kamala does win, then we can speculate a little bit further and say she wins a second term, and that's these guys counted out.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. I mean, sometimes
the world has moved on from them.
My good friend Mark from Chicago would require that I say his tip is J.B. Pritzker, because that's the governor of Illinois. And he looks like being the first governor of Illinois for quite a long time not to go to jail. So he's probably qualified.
Well, that's always a plus. Look, he's been named in the possibles. I did see, we looked at some hypothetical polling last week. I saw Kamala's polling as being almost in lockstep with Joe Biden's in terms of a head-to-head with Trump.
J.B. Pritzker has the other advantage is that he's got his own money. He's, as Mark says,
very wealthy bloke.
He's a real billionaire, not a fake one like the former president.
Who's going to be? Let's again speculate that she will win the nomination. Who's going to be the Veep?
Well, it's got to be a more normal American, someone from Middle America.
It's got let's be honest. It's got to be male. It's got to be a male, and it's got to be white. Let's put it that way. Let's be blunt about this.
Yeah, I personally, I don't think. I think the number of Americans who won't vote for her because she's a woman and because she's black are very few. I mean, I don't buy this that Obama won the presidency in spite of being black. He won in part because he was black. America was ready to vote for a black president.
Yeah, but
and they'd be ready to vote for a woman if they like her.
Yeah, no, that's right. I don't think there's any impediment based on race or gender.
But she's going to need someone from the Midwest.
Well, the word is from my Democrat mate in the States, Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania. So it almost would have to be someone who is, one, reasonably popular, but also from one of the battleground states.
Yeah.
And so I think Shapiro would be the front runner there.
And Shapiro's Jewish, and you might think, well, that doesn't matter, but it might actually help the Democrats. You know, Trump's level pegging with any Democrat in New York City amongst Jews. That's an extraordinary result. That's how unpopular the current administration has become with the Jewish community in the United States.
Yeah, but the problems aren't going to come from New York, are they? They're going to come from Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, Georgia. Georgia will be very, very hard for the Democrats to win. I know that they're got an eye on North Carolina as a potential pickup there. It's always fairly close.
The Democrats think places like New Mexico are now in play, and they're worried about New Jersey. So that's how far behind they are.
And that's why I look at Newsom, and he has a really big impact on and gets a lot of Latino votes. And I just see that being a real positive too. But it's not down to you and I, Jack. It's going to be down to the machinations of the Democratic Party.
It's going to be a fun time in Chicago in September.
It's going to be a fun time, and I really do hope it is an open convention. The last one, I think, Jack, and correct me if I'm wrong, was 1968 after the assassination of Bobby Kennedy.
In Chicago.
And it was in Chicago, and it didn't end well. We can honestly say it didn't end well.
No, it ended well. Ended with Mayor Daley's cops, helmets on, belting people in the streets, and who were that? The Chicago 7 who were charged with conspiracy. I think they all got off in the end.
Yeah, it's a lovely film made about that too. Yeah. So that was the last one. That's the last time they had an open convention. It didn't end well.
The Republican convention was good fun. It went very well for the Republicans until the nominee, and in fact, for the first 25 minutes of his speech, it was still going really well for the Republicans. I think what's his name, Van Jones, the CNN fellow who used to be in the Obama administration, said, look, he was really almost excited, saying, I was watching him saying, look, there's something really big happening here. I haven't seen anything like this since 2008, since the Obama convention. Unfortunately for the Republicans, after that first 25 minutes, Trump went off script, shall we say, and spoke on and on and on. And as David Axelrod said, that's the first good break the Democrats have had in about 5 weeks.
And that was the national unity speech, but it went off piste very quickly.
It started as a national unity speech.
Yeah.
I think the written version might have been could have been characterised that way, but the longer version perhaps not.
Yeah. Okay. So Chicago next month now, in just a couple of weeks, just a few, I think 3 weeks, 19th, I think, isn't it? So under a month. And we'll see how it all goes. But I think the Dems would really benefit from an open convention with, let's say, a handful, 3 or 4 potential candidates, including Kamala and others who can be convinced, Whitmer, Newsom, the Chicago governor, all stepping up to the plate, as they say in the States, and allowing the rank and file to make their own decisions, Jack. That's right.
One of the commentators from the Washington Post put it this way: an open convention generates a lot of buzz, focusing voters on the candidates and getting them interested. Where nominating the unpopular vice president doesn't do the same thing.
Yeah. I see a lot of benefit. So we shall see if they're going to be smart about this. Obviously, the clock is running, Jack. That's the big thing. Pretty much by the time of the convention, ballot papers are being sent off to the printers.
Yes.
And you don't want to miss out there. You're not going to win anything if you're not on the ballot. We talked a little bit about J.D. Vance last week, Jack, as Donald Trump's vice presidential pick. He's an odd fellow. I mean, you said he's very bright. He obviously is, but he's a very odd fellow, isn't he? I mean, I guess we've got to come down to the question of how seriously American voters view the vice president. But they are a heartbeat away. He's opposed to IVF, Jack. That's an odd thing to be opposed to. Like, I mean, that's sort of real hillbilly stuff. And maybe, Kamala will be, if she is the chosen one, will be able to make some political capital there.
Yeah, I think that he is a weak spot in that regard. He was a bit of an odd choice in many ways.
He doesn't have any experience in government, Jack.
No, he doesn't.
But
then nor did Barack Obama. He had exactly the same experience in government as Obama did when he became president. So
yeah, true enough. But he's essentially getting in through the back door, if you like. I mean, if one of the real issues around a Biden second term would be it would be unlikely, or there was a strong possibility that he would not survive that period. And I guess we've got to say the same sort of thing about Trump too. So the vice president nominee is actually really, really important.
Yeah, I don't think the American people will think it's all that important. But
they honestly don't, because. No. What did Adams say about that, Jack? What did Adams say about vice president? I am a nothing, but I could be a something.
Yeah, something like that.
And what is really strange, Jack, is how closely the Democrats, at least, are following the plot lines of Veep, starring Julia Louis-Dreyfus, a very, very funny comedy that positions her as vice president. And then on to, without giving away any spoilers, it's been around for a while, so I don't think I am. She becomes president that way, sort of arse backwards her way into it.
She falls into the presidency.
And she's fatuous and a little bit like the current VP. But
the meme creators are already doing those fake videos of Dreyfus doing Kamala speak.
There's going to be some other things that must alarm Americans too about the Trump push. And I just read this yesterday. State senator in Ohio, his name's George Lang. He was actually calling for a civil war if the Republicans lost the presidency. I know they're an excitable bunch, but that sort of rhetoric's not going to help.
No.
And that's where J.D. Vance spoke there. And J.D. Vance spoke quite reasonably compared to this idiot, George Lang, who no one ever heard of before, but he did the fight, quoting Trump. They're like fanboys, Trump fanboys. And then he went on to this long harangue about if we lose, we may as well tear the place apart.
See, this is the wrong approach. What you're supposed to say in those circumstances, if we lose, I'm moving to Canada.
I think Barbara Streisand.
No one ever does move to Canada. Barbara they always say they go.
She was absolutely going to do it. Back to the Trump assassination attempt, Jack, and a lot of criticism around the Secret Service and around Kimberly Cheetle, who was the Secret Service director. She's highly experienced person. I think she's been in the Secret Service for over 20 years. There are obviously concerns about why they allowed. The first thing I'd say is, why do they establish a perimeter that's shorter than the range of an AR-15, which is the weapon of choice for a lot of these guys? So they establish a perimeter and control that area, but it's shorter than the range of an AR-15, which is very strange in itself.
Well, not just a bit shorter, a lot shorter.
Sorry?
Not just a bit shorter.
A lot shorter, yeah.
Yeah. So the roof that the bloke shot from was under 200 yards, and an AR-15 is pretty good to double that, 400 to 600.
I've seen so many distances. I don't know why we haven't got the tape measure out on that. It's been reported as 150, 148, 137, 118. In fact, I tried to find the real answer, and it was almost impossible to do so. The building he was on, Jack, did you know this? The building he was on was actually a muster centre for the tactical local police.
Yeah, down below.
Well, they're inside the building, Jack.
Yeah,
What's
that's
that
right.
noise up there?
Did you see the interview that Cheetle gave where she was asked why didn't you have people on the roof? And her answer was that the roof was a sloping roof, and we were concerned about the safety of things. Now, there are 5,000, 6,000 Secret Service people, so it's a substantial government organisation. It must have a comms director. And you know how this stuff works. Before you go out and do an interview, you sit down with your comms people and they run you through what's going to happen. And they'll say, they're going to ask you this question, they're going to ask you that question, all that kind of stuff. Now, if she said, I'm going to say it's dangerous for my people to be on a sloping roof, they're going to beat her around the head with the teapot until she changes her mind. You can't say that. People will be laughing at it all around the world.
I would have thought the appropriate response was that building, we believed, was owned by the local police, tactical group.
Yeah. Anyway, she didn't say that. She was in Congress yesterday giving evidence, and let me just say, you remember the three university presidents who went down there and killed their career in a day in Congress?
Well,
she was worse than them.
Oh God!
So the Secret Service should fire their comms people and their lawyers who are prepping people to go and give evidence and do interviews, because they're clearly not up to the job. And really, for her own sake, she should hand in her resignation. If she wants to have a career beyond this, she needs to go and find something else to do, because she's
there's going to be a bit of an inquiry. We still know so little about the shooter, and there just doesn't appear to be there's certainly no manifesto. There's no online activity indicating radicalisation. There's nothing really. He was a registered GOP voter, and he gave $15 to Act Blue, the CPAC, when Biden was inaugurated. On the day of actually Biden's inauguration. Anyway, it's trivia. It's really nothing. And it's entirely possible we'll never properly understand his motives. But the reading I've done on Crooks, Matthew Crooks, is that he seemed to have. He was sort of sniffing around at a presidential assassination as well. So he was looking at Biden. You know, in some of the Google searches taken from his phone, he was looking at what Biden was up to and where he was going to be. And he obviously checked where Trump was and decided it was close enough. Took the day off from work, worked at a nursing home as a dietitian, and apparently there without any problems, and off he went. Very, very strange, and I don't know that we'll ever understand fully what his motives were.
It might be that he's just a bit of a nutcase.
Well, if we go back to the Reagan stuff that you mentioned last week, Hinckley, the assassin there, the attempted assassin there, Yes, he was. He did it to try and get the attraction from Jodie Foster. So yes, there's all manner of things that can go wrong, but this guy doesn't have a history of mental health. In fact, both of his parents are mental health professionals. It's very odd, and I'm not trying to elicit a conspiracy theory around this. As you say, it might just be a simple case of someone who just basically snapped. But it is very strange.
Can we safely say that Ronald Reagan wouldn't have been shot if Jodie Foster had come out as gay earlier?
Maybe not. I mean, I spent a bit of time last week. Joe Biden said, about political violence. You didn't expect him to say this, but he said, this is not who we are. And wait a minute, this is exactly who you are as a country. And then you go through the long history of political violence in the United States, assassinations. Of course, there have been 4 presidents assassinated in office, so many attempts. The story that I thought was just really heartbreaking was that Abraham Lincoln's son, Robert was in the White House when his father was assassinated at Ford Theatre. And then he witnessed the assassination of Garfield at a railway station waiting room in DC. And then 20 years later, he was also at an exposition in Buffalo, New York, when McKinley was assassinated. So
one of my favourite stories is the 2 senators were having a disagreement on the floor of the House, and one of them picked up a chair and belted the bloke so badly with the chair that I think he was in a wheelchair forever after that.
Why is that your favourite story, Jack?
Oh, I just think it's we talk about civility and all that sort of stuff, and I think, well, that's taken it to a new level. It's picking up a chair, and I think the worst we've ever done in Australia is Gough Whitlam poured a glass of water over Paul Aslak, but no one's picked up a chair and belted the crap out of anyone.
A poet fired shots at Arthur Corbell, Jack. You remember that?
But not on the floor of the House.
No, not on the floor of the House. But we're talking about political violence, and even those 4 assassins who took out Lincoln, McKinley, Garfield, and later JFK. There's a fair old range of deranged human beings involved in that. And one of my favourite stories is Teddy Roosevelt, and I think he was in Milwaukee, and he was shot. He had been president. He declined his second term. He was actually, because he was McKinley's vice president, he took over from that. Then he did another 4 years, but declined to go any further and cited George Washington. But so unhappy was he with the state of the Republican Party that he decided to have another crack in 1912. And he was shot in the chest. He was a tough boy, Teddy Roosevelt. He was shot in the chest. The assassin, who was being pummeled by the mob, he said he called the mob to calm, and then said, bring him to me. And so they brought him to him, and he was the fellow who'd tried to kill him was basically very, very mentally unwell. And Teddy locked eyes with him and saw there wasn't much going on there, so he handed him over to the police. And still bleeding from a gut shot, he decided, because he was such an experienced hunter and killer of human beings himself, that he wasn't aspirating blood, so the bullet hadn't gone through the lungs. He's no worries, dusted himself off, and gave his speech. He said, "You'll have to just bear with me, friends." He spoke to those assembled to listen to his speech. "You'll just have to bear with me. I don't know if you know, but I have been shot." And he went on to make his speech in full, but just a little bit toned down. One of the most extraordinary people of all time was Teddy Roosevelt. I think he was a New York congressman, assemblyman, something like 21, 22.
If you next time you're in Manhattan, there is a museum. It's the house he grew up in, and it's well worth a look.
Yeah, he was.
He was a sickly child. They've even got those Indian club things. He used to use those all day, every day, to try and build himself up because he'd been a sickly and weakly child.
Absolutely driven. The one criticism, and it is a fairly serious criticism we could make of Teddy Roosevelt's presidency and political career, is that he liked war a little bit too much. He actually really enjoyed it, and he wrote about his first human kill in Cuba when he was with the Rough Riders there, a sort of mercenary group that the American military weren't too keen to have there, but they were going there anyway. And he wrote about how he felt about shooting a Spanish soldier in the face and killing him. But just an extraordinary character was Teddy Roosevelt. No one ever been quite like him. You mentioned free speech, civility, and all that, and you linked to a lovely little photograph from Charlotte, who is on X, like many of us, with Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer having a civil conversation on the floor of Parliament with people milling around them.
Well, this was after the King's speech, the King's speech takes place in the Lords, and the tradition has it that as they return to the Commons, they return in pairs. So the Prime Minister and the Leader of Opposition walk together, then the deputies, then the chancellors, and all that sort of stuff. So they're all walking through there, having a fine old chat, clapping each other on the back, smiling at each other, and I do think that's a very good thing.
It is a good thing, and we never want to lose sight of it, and just how important that is. Of course, we went through 2020, where Donald Trump decided he didn't like the result and refused to concede. But that concession, that civility, is very, very important for our democracy, or democracies around the world. Bob Newhart, very, very sad news. I love the Bob Newhart shows in their various iterations, and Bob Newhart, of course, started as a stand-up comedian, passed away over the weekend, fair old age,
94.
His first comedy album went to number one. And then the second one came out, and it only went to number two because Bob Newhart's first album was still number one, and eventually went to number one. He was an incredibly funny man, and had this sort of dour, understated style to his comedy. Very, very funny, as I say. And a great speech giver as well.
An accountant from Chicago.
And looked it.
And got into comedy almost by accident, because he used to have a joke with a friend. They would make telephone calls to each other, and in the style that he later used on his comedy albums. And someone heard one of these and picked them up and offered him a gig. So there you go.
Yeah, just look, it's beyond being streamed now. Because of age, I suppose. But I would think that the Bob Newhart shows, and like I say, they're various iterations, perhaps not the old black and white ones, absolutely worth your time, but you just can't get them anymore. His great friend, of course, was another rather wonderful stand-up comedian by the name of Don Rickles, very unpolitically correct, was Don. And
if you want some of the more recent Bob Newhart stuff, two things: The Big Bang Theory. He was in that a few times. Yes, he was on that.
Yes,
and there's a wonderful. He was the guest host on Saturday Night Live years ago, and there's a sketch he did for those that was written by the great Norm Macdonald.
And there was a little clip of him came up on my Instagram account, Jack, where he was roasting Don Rickles and talked about how they became best friends, and that was basically because Don Rickles was hiring, and he said, I hope he doesn't take. He said, I know Don Rickles won't take umbrage with this because he doesn't understand what umbrage means. Very, very funny guy. A great loss. Kept us entertained for many, many years in that sort of style of Dick Van Dyke, another great comedian in his own right. Still around too, I believe, isn't Dick Van Dyke?
Yeah, he looks a bit weird, but he's still around.
He's still with us. I think he's well into his 90s too.
Yeah,
and gave himself a bit of a workout over the journey too. I think he was a rather large booze hound for many, many years. But Bob Newhart has passed on, and we are much diminished by that.
Well, there's some lessons in that, you know. There's a lovely meme going around this week that it's interesting that Keith Richards has outlived Richard Simons, the health guru.
Keith Richards outlived everybody. He's certainly done extremely well, and they're touring again. You know, the Stones are touring again. They're playing in the States at the moment.
Mick's a year younger than Joe Biden,
and Mick, to his considerable credit, goes pretty well. He's still very active on stage. It's not as if he's sitting in a chair. He's still up and about. And if you looked at him and said, was he 80, 81?
He's almost exactly a year younger than Joe Biden.
Yeah, if you looked at him saying there's no way he's 81. Now he's getting a bit of ink in the hair, obviously. In fact, they all are. All the remaining stays. Ronnie Wood, of course, too, Keith. But Mick, yeah, he's due to live a fair old age. I think his father lived a decent age too.
Mick's got a relative up in the Southern Highlands, up near you somewhere.
Is that right? Yeah,
his sister or something, I think. Whenever he comes to Australia, he goes up there and has a weekend.
Okay, lovely. Anyway, we haven't got a lot on Australia at the moment. We're going to look at CFMEU a bit, but the National Party Indigenous Affairs spokesperson, Senator Nampijima, has been in the. I saw her interviewed on 7:30 last night. You probably don't get that in Hong Kong, or if you do, probably comes in a weird way. And she made the point, with not too much questioning, that she believed that things like Aboriginal health services and Aboriginal legal services, that these things were wrong, that these things discriminated negatively against Indigenous Australians, and that we all should be one person. But then when asked to make cuts, she just couldn't articulate anything, you know. I think she's all. I'll say it right now. I think she's all rhetoric and not much good beyond that. I don't think she's a real strong policy person, Jack.
No, perhaps not.
She says
perhaps detail's not her thing.
It's not, the grand speeches are a thing. So I'll quote from it, Jack. There is no alternative possible version of Australian history where Indigenous Australians would have been left alone to continue their way of life. The only question was about colonisation by whom and when, rather than if. And we are fortunate it was the British who arrived and not many of the other alternatives. Dutch? Well, the Dutch, mate. What was so horrible about the Dutch?
Have a look at compare Indonesia and Malaysia.
Yeah, East Timor.
That was the Portuguese.
Yeah, look, of course it was. Yeah, Portuguese. Yeah, not
terrible.
Great. Belgians, not great.
No.
I mean, the British. We can talk about what took place in Jamaica post-slavery. It was just awful. I mean, pre and post-slavery in Jamaica was some of the gravest outrages committed by a British colonisation. Look, that it's probably right. What she's saying there is probably right in terms of setting up the institutions, your political and legal institutions, that tend to be strong enough to sustain the pressures of war and depressions and things like that.
Well, you look at the British record, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, the United States are four of the top 10 or so successful countries for over 100 years, all British colonies. Even look around Asia, Mumbai, Singapore, Hong Kong, three of the great cities of Asia are really British inventions. They've all been developed by the locals since, but the British record's pretty good.
Well,
not perfect.
No, not perfect, and far from it. Deeply imperfect, but part of historical context. When I look at the West Indies, some of the not fledgling nations, they've had their independence for a long time. We're talking about some of the smaller islands. They have had suffered significant political tensions, but they stand up. They continue on because they have the essential principles of British government there. Bicameral parliaments, one vote, one value, these sorts of things that will stand up to a fair amount of extreme politics when it comes around.
Other thing I noticed the other day on Twitter, where someone was complaining about the mediocrity of a lot of politicians these days, and if you have those proper institutions, mediocre people are all you need. You actually don't need the great man or great woman to come along and run the country. If the systems are right, it's designed so that mediocre people can run it.
Indeed, yeah, and probably that's a choice that the American people are facing now. Is it a choice between mediocrity and chaos? That might be the choice. We'll see how that all goes. We do have a rather long letter from our good friend Baseman, Ray. G'day, Ray.
Are there any other kind but long ones?
There's a lot of reading, but I'm going to keep it short. Now, Ray is having conniptions about Labor's prospects at the next election, and he goes on to explain why he's having conniptions. But his letter starts, if Labor permits the next election to be a referendum about nuclear power, there's a very good chance that Peter Dutton would win handsomely. I don't think that's the case. I tend to be of the Chris Mitchell school that says that Peter Dutton is writing the longest suicide note in Australian political history. But he believes that nuclear could change the agenda. What are the chances of that, Jack?
I don't think it's right. I'm probably fall a little bit between you and Chris Mitchell. I don't think nuclear is as unpopular as a lot of people think it is, but nor do I think it's terribly popular.
I think it's one of those things. The more you see, and look, I got no problem, in principle with nuclear power. It's driven countries like France and South Korea into economic prosperity. It's just if you're going to start from scratch, you've got to understand that you're not going to have anything up and running for 20 years. I mean, Dutton can say that he's going to have modular reactors up by, I think it's 2035, and then the big one by 2037. And you say, mate, I can point to any number of large-scale nuclear reactors being built around the world, and they don't knock them over in 10 years.
Yeah, but there is a good point in what Bassman's saying. Is I think the current approach of the government to energy is not a good one, not good electorally. I think they're going to take some damage from it, but I still think they'll win.
Yeah, and there's another thing that's bothering me a bit about the Australian political discourse, Jack, and that is this obsession with the one of the likely outcomes of the next election will be a hung parliament. And you think, look, I wouldn't mind being these guys' bookies, because it's actually really being a bookie for these guys, because it's actually a really hard thing to do just numerically, is to have a hung parliament. But it seems to be the obsession in a lot of opinion columns at the moment. I very much of the school that believes that Labor will be returned to power. Whether their majority, and they don't have a big one, is diminished or not remains to be seen. My tip, Baseman, and this might assuage your fears to some degree, is that I think Labor will be returned with a slightly increased majority. That's where I think we're going. And I think nuclear is, it'll be perhaps a nice distraction, but I think the more it's rolled out, the more detail we get from the coalition, the less likely it will be a vote winner. Kind of where we are at the moment with their 6+1, and that's 6 modular reactors, a small scale or SMRs, and 1 large scale reactor. If I understand the release, and you can't even determine the policy release is going to go that way, and then they're talking about multiple reactors and on the same 7 sites and all this sort of stuff. But on their own figures, you've got nuclear and the small modular reactors. They say they can pick them up there for about $5 billion per. So that's $30 million, plus the 7th, which is a large scale reactor, and we'll look at. We won't use the UK costings because that's one out of the box, but let's say $35 billion, which is a rollout of the big one in Georgia. So that's $65 billion, and that's contributing about 4% to the national grid. And I think when people understand that, they'll go, oh, no, thank you. All right, CFMEU, Jack.
Did you see the interview that Nick McKenzie gave on the telly the other day?
I didn't. I've seen the 7:30. I'm sorry, 7:30. I've seen the 60 Minutes report. I have a deep respect for Nick.
He said the state governments knew. He says, and the federal governments knew. He says, particularly the Victorian government knew.
Oh yeah.
He said this was common knowledge. This is the criticisms of the CFMEU of the involvement of motorcycle gang members, etc., etc.
Yeah.
He said this was common knowledge all around the trade union movement.
It's common knowledge all around Melbourne, Jack.
Yeah. He said, particularly in the Victorian state government, he said, the knowledge goes right to the top.
I think that's absolutely right. It's
Did you see that the poor hapless Victorian state minister had to be rescued mid press conference by the Premier?
No, missed that too.
Yeah, no, he was being asked about the CFMEU stuff, and he was doing his best to obfuscate and doing it quite poorly. So she's kind of walked past him and stood in front of the microphone and taken over. So whenever that happens, you know they're not going well.
No, it's not. Things aren't going all that well. They're wide open to this. I mean, this is not an isolated case. I mean, when we look at the construction industry in most countries of the world, in the Western world, there's someone there, whether it's La Cosa Nostra or some organised crime group, that will take 15% off the top. So basically, in these major public works, 15% of taxpayers' money ends up in the hands of organised criminal syndicates. That's completely unacceptable, but it is almost the norm in the Western world.
Yeah, I wouldn't agree it's the norm. It's common.
Yeah, well, it's been a racket. It's been a racket for criminal groups for a long time. Lenny McPherson was standing over building sites in the 1960s, Jack. You know, I mean, this has been going on for a long time. The really critical point politically is who knew what and when, and that's going to be extremely difficult. I mean, if the opposition was in government today, and then obviously the answer would be a Royal Commission. But they had one, didn't they, Jack? We didn't have a Royal Commission into the unions, and Mick Gatto wasn't called. I couldn't understand why some of these characters weren't called to give evidence. These so-called mediators in the construction business. Why weren't they called to give evidence in the Royal Commission in the first place? Was Dyson
no
Hayden
idea.
distracted by a pretty young assistant in his chambers? Who knows?
Who knows?
But how you clean this up? People are talking about, Peter Dutton was talking about deregistration. You can't really deregister the union now. You can't do that now. I mean, you could, but it would leave literally thousands of workers without any security over salary and conditions. So what needs to happen, Jack, correct me if I'm wrong, is a lot of police action, a lot of people being charged. I see Sec's 2IC. We did the old Norm Gallagher, mate. He's had the house refurbished and renovated and filled with appliances, all out of the largesse of construction companies, none of whom have been named too, and that's another critical factor. That's the bit that's missing in this, is who was paying, who were paying the bribes, because that's an offence. It's an offence to offer them as much as it is to receive them. So those things. So there needs to be a lot of police action done. I cannot believe that there can't be a judicial inquiry launched by the Victorian government. They'll be very reluctant to do that, but they need to do it. And that will ultimately lead to deregistration. I think that's what should happen, but deregistration might not happen for another 10 years.
A lot depends upon Jacinta Allen in this. Her own union credentials are impeccable. Her father and her grandfather were union officials. But she needs to ask herself, well, what would my predecessor have done? And I'm pretty sure that Dan Andrews would have thrown the CFMEU under the bus if he had to.
Yeah. It's not an easy thing. We talked about the relationship between the CFMEU and builders' labourers' unions going back into history. And there is a close connection there. And there is what would we say, almost a sort of romantic attachment, Jack. These are the big burly guys, are the guys who built the cities and built our cities and all this sort of stuff. It needs a lot of police action and let the chips fall where they may. But it won't get to government. I appreciate what Nick says, but it won't get to government.
I thought the police commissioner didn't cover himself with glory when he was asked why they did nothing. It was sort of, well, we didn't know anything about it. No one made a complaint.
Yeah, well, but at the same time, they had federal police and some state squads looking into them. So that's just a really poor answer. Under pressure, you just go, no, we've been looking at these things. Sometimes it takes time to get a prosecution together, and that's how you answer that. Some of these people are hopeless when a microphone's put in front of them, Jack.
Perhaps he has the same comms advisor who's been looking after the Secret Service in Washington.
Right. It's sort of beggars belief sometimes. All right, bad news. I think Ukraine is looking at the American presidential election with a deep sense of concern, but also they should be concerned about Germany because Germany plans to halve its military aid for Ukraine, cutting more than £3 billion. This is from the UK tally. Of course, it'll be euros. Yes, okay. Berlin plans to slash aid from €8 billion to €4 billion. According to a draft of the 2025 budget for Europe's economy. Yeah, this is not going to be good for the people of Ukraine.
We're running out of time, but let's just say that this is one to keep an eye on because the support for Ukraine is starting to soften a bit.
It is indeed, and it may soften a whole lot further if Donald Trump is elected. Although he did say he has said on a number of occasions there'll be peace in Ukraine. In a
day.
A day, or I thought it was a week.
Oh, okay.
We'll give him a week.
Yeah.
We'll give him a week. He'll knock that over with his consummate negotiating skills.
This will be a bit like Easter, that the Lord may have risen in 3 days. 2 days, I could have done it myself. Yeah.
I find this a bit. I know you're not a big fan, but the Just Stop Oil, and they are silly protests. I particularly hate the ones where they attack artworks and monuments. But from after basically blockading the M25, which is the kind of the London Beltway, in November 22, 4 environmental activists have been jailed, and not for small periods, Jack. Roger Hallam, 58, Daniel Shaw, 38, Lewis Lancaster, 58. They're not young tearaways, Jack. This is the thing. Well, there's Cressida Gethin, 22. They had crossed the line, according to the judge, and crossed the line from concerned campaigner to fanatic. And they've got sort of 5 year. Hallam was sentenced. This is the 50 was sentenced to 5 years imprisonment, while the other defendants each received 4-year jail terms. So those are significant jail sentences, Jack.
Yeah, all for they're all repeat offenders. Who've been warned in the past. I think the sentences are a bit stiff.
They are a bit, aren't they?
I think the thing we should remember, though, is that if you want to be involved in civil disobedience, the traditional way of doing that involved a willingness to take the consequences as well.
Yeah, but at the same time, I tend to agree that 4 and 5 year jail sentences, and if you compared that to various sort of criminal outrages and the sentences handed out there for assaults on persons and things like that, I think you'd find there'd be in the UK there'd be a substantial difference.
The mum of Cressida, I saw her on the telly last night giving a speech. Cressida's the 22-year-old.
She's the young one. She's the young gun, yeah.
And she was saying how terrible the decision was because she's going to miss her brother's wedding. And, of course, this was a little bit tone deaf because there were people who were stuck on the M25, one bloke who missed his father's funeral, and people who miss cancer appointments and all that kind of stuff. So missing your brother's wedding is just not quite the same.
Yeah, she needs probably have a chat with the comms people as well.
Yeah.
But
as you say, some of these people should avoid a microphone at all costs.
Stay away. I think the sentence is excessive. But having said that, if I was on the M25 caught in traffic and not moving for hours and hours and hours on end, I'd probably be calling for the death penalty for all those involved. And no judge or jury, just straight out the back, get in the truck. All right, very quickly, Jack. Sir Keir Starmer has said he will take the brakes off Britain by tearing up planning restrictions to build 1.5 million new homes. We've got a housing crisis. You've probably got a housing crisis in Hong Kong, but it's nothing like that in London. I mean, it is just out of control.
Yeah, and if this works, good luck to him, but it may not. The other thing he's doing is they've got a problem with migration there, so he's going to slip 84 million quid to Africa and the Middle East in the hope of preventing people from coming to the UK. But the only way you can prevent people from coming to the UK is if their circumstances in Africa and the Middle East are as good as they would be in London, and 84 million quid's not going to
get you there. Going to be a little bit short. Going to be a little bit short. Look, the philosophical approach is right. It's just there's not enough money, and there will never be enough money.
So it's just not going to work. Can we go on to sport?
We are moving on to sport right now, Jack. I'm sorry. We just wanted to briefly touch on the fact that we had the Israelis struck against the Houthi rebels in Yemen after a drone was sent off by the Houthis that got through due to an error, according to the Israeli military. So the F-35s got scrambled and out they went boom, boom, boom.
if you like a bonfire, the port in Yemen looked a lot like a very large version of one the other day.
Yeah, it's not quite as big as the Lebanon blast, but getting there, and lots of flammable liquids went up in flames. So Israel unapologetic about it. Stop sending us drones. Otherwise, this is what happens. All right, now for your benefit, Jack. If no one else's, we are moving on to sport. There's a very good, perhaps not a piece, but at least an opinion being expressed by Mark Butcher, former English Test player and now commentator. And we're talking about, in the context of this, is that the West Indies are in England at the moment. They were soundly beaten in 2 and a bit days in the first Test. Quite competitive all but the last day of the second Test, with the third Test starting later this week. But Mark Butcher talks about the importance of warm-up matches, and this is so right. I mean, in the old days, and I don't even get in the old days, but a touring side would come to Australia. They'd play a couple of Sheffield Shield sides, a couple of states, and a couple of warm-up games to boot. But with the way cricket's programmed these days, it just doesn't happen. So the West Indies got into England. They were seriously underdone, and they got rolled in 2 and a bit days, and that doesn't please anybody. So Butcher says, basically this is where the money's got to come into. Some of the money's got to come into to get touring sides, whether they come to England or Australia or India, into some sort of form in local conditions.
Yeah. The second Test was a good Test match.
It was, yeah. And they fell away on the last day. They
were skittled for 150 on the last day, but until then they were quite competitive. England made 400 on the first day. They came out and made 440 or something. Yeah. Just looking ahead, I've got to say the England batting's pretty good looking ahead to the Ashes. Their opening pair are as good as they've had for a while. Pope's a good cricketer. Harry Brook's a really, really good cricketer.
I don't think there's anything wrong with their batting at all. When we talk about them coming,
it's their bowling. It's their bowling that might be. They've got 15 months to fix the bowling.
Yeah, aren't they out here in the summer? They're out here in the summer, aren't they?
25, 26, I think it is.
Oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, so look, when you look at that, Crawley, Duckett, I'm not a huge fan of Duckett because he's an opener and he plays at everything, but he gets away with it. So you go Crawley, Duckett, Pope, Root, Brook, Stokes. That's a pretty good. That's a pretty good 1 to 6, and I don't think much will change there. The keeper seems to be.
He's okay.
Yeah. Well, it just seems to be who knows who they'll go with the keeper. And then in the last Test we had Shoaib Bashir, who's got a bit about him as a leggy, and then Mark Wood, Gus Atkinson, who's raw and looks up to it. He bowls a good pace, good clip, and you need to do that in Australia. If you're a seam bowler who bowls 125, you're going to get spanked in Australia. But if you've got some pace behind you, you should be all right. And Chris Wokes, who's a bit of a workhorse himself,
who probably won't come to Australia.
Yeah, look, the trouble with Mark Wood is that he just doesn't back up, and that's not a reflection on him. You play a Test and he puts such pressure on his body. That he doesn't really back up, particularly when Tests are just a few days apart. So there's always a bit of an issue about that. The West Indian, the guy who got the 100, Cavum Hodge, was facing Mark Wood at 150 plus, and you heard that one, didn't you? He goes, I've got a wife and children at home. And they both had a good laugh about it, which is kind of really good too. So God bless the West Indies. It was good to see them improve significantly, and they're not far away. And as Mark Butcher said, give them a couple of games to get used to the conditions.
How much better would that? How much better would that? But when there was a huge improvement from the from the first to the second test, how much better would they have been with a couple of warm-up games?
Yeah, exactly right. Where are we?
Did you watch the Origin?
Oh,
it was a cracking game.
Absolutely ripper of a game. Don't ever change. State of Origin. Blues were. I was surprised. I thought it was going to be a same old Queensland, just knock them over in the second half. But no, they were very, very good and well coached.
Well, I kind of thought the Blues were well on top in general play and hadn't put the points on the board. And Queensland generally make you pay for that, but they didn't. It was a terrific game.
My butcher mate, he reckons you watch the State of Origin and he says you go to bed half time and Queensland are 6 points down, you know they're going to win. And it's kind of the way it has been going. But the Blues have won the title. And it means that their coach, he'll be coached for a good 10 or 20 years.
Yeah. No, it was the very best of rugby league.
We got the Olympics starting very soon, Jack, so we'll have to get on that next week. But in the AFL, Jack, has everyone forgotten how good Brisbane are? It seems like they just come from nowhere and now they're sitting third.
Yeah, look, I'm a Swans fan, but I wasn't confident because Brisbane are the current form team.
Yeah, up there. I think they've lost one of their last 11. And up there is back to Fortress Gabba again.
I watched John Longmire's press conference after the thing, and even though the Swans lost, he was pretty happy.
I think the only issues he would have would be the injury to Papley, and it seems like that. I haven't heard an update, but it didn't look good.
It looked like weeks at best.
It looked to be a 4 to 6 week injury to me, minimum. Blues had a win against, and you've got to mention North Melbourne, and the Blues had a 3-goal win, and you'd probably expect them to win by a little bit more. But they have improved dramatically. They were the easy beats of the competition in the first half of the year. They played Collingwood. I couldn't tell you which round number. They were 9 goals up at half time, and they got beaten by a goal or under a goal. And I remember talking to some of my North Melbourne mates, and they were filthy with the umpires, and they were filthy on this and filthy on that. And I said, hey, if I was your coach, I'd be sitting the boys down and saying, all right, we're disappointed we lost, but we just gave it to the reigning premiers in the first half. We were 9 goals in front of them, and it was not because they didn't turn up. It was because of how ferocious we were at the contest. And they have the inklings of being a very, very good side in the future. Their midfield's excellent, and they've got a couple of young guns who are just going to be.
The Jewish lad, Harry Sheasel, he's a ripper.
He is a ripper, but there's a few out there too. They've got a lot to look forward to at North Melbourne. I was nervous about that game because I thought North's best is pretty good. But the Bombers are on the slide, and I thought they'd make the 8. I'm not quite so sure now. And it looks like Collingwood, well, they've all got 5 games to go. Collingwood would have to win 4 of the next 5 minimum, and those games include games against Sydney in Sydney, Carlton at the G, Brisbane at the G, and Melbourne at the G.
I think they're cooked.
They are done.
But the form sides is pretty much the current is the Sydney, the Swans,
we haven't mentioned them.
the Carlton, Brisbane, and the Bulldogs are the form teams. I think probably the top 2, the Swans and Carlton are probably just off their best, but they're still that's still good enough. But the other 2, Brisbane and the Western Bulldogs.
2016 all over again, Jack. Sydney, Western Bulldogs. Certainly, when you look at the Western Bulldogs list, it's just so much talent. Norton's back there playing forward, and they've got some ripping tall forwards. Very, very good side. David Morrow, we did the State of Origin actually before the game. There was a minute's silence for David Morrow, ABC broadcaster, 2GB broadcaster. I think he's covered 6 Olympics. He's been a stalwart of broadcasting, sadly passed away after a brain cancer diagnosis in February, sadly passed away just on the eve of the 3rd State of Origin game, Jack.
Yeah, well, when I moved to Sydney in '94, I'd often be out doing a bit of business on a Saturday, had the car radio on, and he was kind of the voice of rugby league for me.
Rugby league, also a great horse racing caller, I should say. And much loved by many, our good friend and my co-author of The Fine Cotton Fiasco, Pat Shield, he and David were pretty good mates. And that generally involved
I used to see
a lot
him
of drinking.
Yeah, well, he was known as Thirsty, Morrow.
That's that was his nickname. Yeah,
yeah. And you'd remember a little pub called the Phoenix?
Yes, indeed.
In Wallara, and I used to see David Morrow in there a fair bit.
I saw him in there a few times too. Yeah,
yeah, and we were on sort of shake hands, say good day, Dave, good day, Jack, sort of acquaintance thing. And he was a very thirsty fella, and I can still remember one day there. He was on the board at Eastern Suburbs Cricket Club. David Morrow. And he was telling me that they had a new young fella there, a kid from Paddo who was going to be, could be anything. And it was the boy who stacked the shelves in the supermarkets, David Morrow.
I think he was from Paddington, though, mate. Not from that illustrious part of Sydney. He was.
Yeah, no, but the Eastern Suburbs Cricket Club played at the Trumper Oval.
Yeah, that's right. And Dave, of course, came from a bit further down in the eastern suburbs there, down near Long Bay. But look, I was.
He's a lost, David Murray. He was a great company and a really good commentator.
I also bumped into in the Phoenix, and this is years ago. It was Norman May.
Yeah, I've seen. I saw. I've got a confession here. The Phoenix was about 50 yards from my front door.
Yeah,
for a good bit of the time in Sydney. Norman May was in there, and Kenny Callender was always in there too.
Was he? I never saw Kenny Callender. I love Kenny Callender. All right. Well, that takes us out.
All right. Except we've got one more thing.
Oh, you got one more?
Yeah. This is from Northern Ireland. A man has been accused of keeping his dead father's head in the freezer in the family home.
Nice.
Yeah. The Londonderry Magistrates Court heard that the pensioner's remains, this is his father's, were found in the living room of the house, wrapped in a plastic sheet and a duvet, but their head was placed in an open fridge freezer while the rest, they had been a post-mortem, but that was inconclusive. So I suspect they'll be going over that again. And
because there are one or two outstanding questions there, like decapitated. Was that post-mortem or
apparently it was post-mortem? But
oh dear.
But he was. The son has a PhD in something or other. And he was living in the family home, although he mainly lived in the garage. I think we know how that one's going to end.
I think he's probably seen Dad's remains on the floor under the tarp there, and be a bit smelly after a while. Yeah. So he's moved into the garage. All right, we'll have to see how he gets on, but I'd be surprised if he's not facing some fairly serious charges, Jack, if not a murder, Blue, then tampering with corpses and one or two other things that don't go down well with the constabulary.
No, they don't.
All right, well, that takes us out. It's been a huge week, as I say. American politics just keeps us intrigued, and when you just think you've almost got it under control, something, the wheel turns and we go off into another tangent, and that's where it's been for the last couple of weeks. Thank you for your opinions today, Jack. And we do welcome all opinions. We got a few in there. I got a bit of stuff here. A few little tips on grabbing Kamala at $6 and things like that from our listeners. Always good to hear from you. Drop me a line if you want to make a comment or a criticism, whatever you got. You can hit me up on X or Twitter at Jack the Insider. DM's always open, and you can get hold of Jack too by hitting him up on his Substack. Jack, what is it again?
Yeah, hongkongjack.substack.com.
Beautiful stuff. All right. Well, that takes us out, and we'll catch up with you next week, listeners. See you.